when it comes to this situation with Russia, every single evangelical in all of Ukraine is saying the same thing, with little differences in the nuances, but we're all saying that Russia is evil, that we need to defend Ukraine, every single last one of us. Whenever all of evangelicalism in Ukraine, which by the way is the Bible Belt of the entire region, and we got all the evangelicals saying one thing, and we've got Tucker Carlson saying something else, I would say maybe you should listen to the evangelicals, not to the talking head that's a shock jock formerly on the Fox News network. See where I'm going with that? I'm not an ecumenical guy, but there's something to be said about ecumenical agreement on this issue.
Why should people think that these labs were to, I don't know, to spread some create some biological weapon against some other countries? I think it's also the narrative from Russia to tell this information to their own people and to say, yes, you know, there are so many reasons why we should start this war. Nazis in Ukraine, Biolabs, and they're all against Russia and so on.
Again, it's a personal opinion, but unfortunately, the situation with Burisma is being presented not holistically, but selectively in order to deliver some political dividends to the party who is presenting.
And also, you know what, because Russian propaganda mostly works like the opposite direction. They are doing something and then they blame it on us. For example, they were bombing civil objects of infrastructure, just some home of people, a lot of homes, you know, and then they always blame Ukraine that we are doing it. And so when they say this stuff about Biolabs, I start to suspect that they have some Biolabs and try to produce some chemical weapon. I mean, like, I'm almost sure that they tried to do it.
Hello, good morning or good evening, depending on wherever you are. In this video, we're going to talk about media corruption, about the Biolabs narrative, about Biden corruption and Burisma Holdings. So come along and join the conversation. One interesting phenomenon I've noticed around this war in Ukraine is that many American conservatives, kind of as a pushback or knee-jerk reaction against what they see as a deceptist left-wing controlled media, and Ukrainians push back strongly against anything they perceive remotely resembling a Russian talking point, while at the same time following liberal media outlets. What are your thoughts on the media and propaganda surrounding the war?
So there's the left, which we're all opposed to. A lot of the people that are falling for the Russian talking points, I'm coming across them shockingly enough in churches. Even a lot of Christians are falling into this. So theologically conservative, and then whenever these talking points of Russia come up, they start to accept the Russian ideology, which is not right-wing ideology. It's not leftist ideology. Left is an alternative to the right, but the Russian ideology is also an alternative to the right. It is, to use a shortened term, alt-right. So it's hard for me to call them conservatives whenever they're accepting Russian ideology, because the Russian ideology is an alternative to true conservatism.
A significant number of conservatives in the United States have observed the way the media in the United States have really done nothing but parrot left-wing talking points, and who have, well, frankly, lied about a lot of things, who suppressed information and truth, particularly surrounding COVID and the lockdowns and things of that sort, that there was actually major censorship of any alternative viewpoints except for the one that the government was promoting. So the assumption is that the media lies. So the net result is, if the media is saying something, we can't trust it. So we've got to look for an alternative explanation. And that alternative explanation, you know, the assumption is the media lies all the time. And since it's presenting Ukraine as the victim here, that must not really be the truth, which is an absolutely asinine way of thinking, frankly. But I think that's really the dynamic that's going on. When you add on top of that, that many of the really hardcore conservatives in the United States are particularly concerned about homosexuality and things of that sort, Putin comes out verbally against it. he starts looking like a hero against some sort of global homosexual movement trying to enforce this in all countries and all that sort of thing. So then he becomes the person who's moral. He's the one who's standing up for traditional morality. He's the one who's standing up for the truth of the gospel. All of these kinds of things. I've seen this in rhetoric on my own Facebook pages.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a big thing. There's such a divide right now in America. You know, that all the many Republicans just want to believe whatever is the opposite of what the Democrats believe. And so if you've got Biden that's talking about Ukraine and how we need to do this, and the left and Hollywood are all gung-ho for Ukraine, of course their bias is they want to be against Ukraine. Ukraine's a victim. They haven't done anything. They are a peaceful nation, a sovereign, independent nation that has been ruthlessly attacked. And I was recently in the States speaking at a conference, and somebody asked me, so how do we know that what we're seeing, you know, the destroyed cities and everything is real? How do we know it's not just fabricated? I'm like, we have cities that have been wiped off the face of the earth. There have been 250,000 civilians who have been killed in this already. Children, you know, women, bombing maternity houses. This is not fabricated. This isn't Hollywood. I mean, anybody wants to come on over, I'll drive you over and show you some of the battlefields. It's real, and the right is getting to a point where they're attacking Ukraine. Ukraine is the victim. They have done nothing. All they have done is try to fight back, and of course they're asking for help. Of course, if you were being attacked, you would want to have somebody help you too. So if you're going to get mad at somebody, if you don't like the way that America's spending money, get mad at American politicians, challenge them, ask them questions, do whatever. You know, get mad at Russia for attacking, but don't attack the person who's being slaughtered. You know, the country that's being slaughtered. What kind of sense does that make? Is that your compassion? Is that what you do to help people? That, you know, you see somebody getting kicked by a mob, you get mad at the guy getting kicked. What is that?
How many of your heroes are heroes just because they're opposed to homosexuality?
Exactly.
That's not a, now if you are trying to promote the 2S LGBTQIAA plus agenda, that's the most recent group of letters and numbers that I've heard of. If you're trying to promote that ideology, then you have the set of problems that are evident. But just because you reject that particular set of problems doesn't mean you've got an alternative. It doesn't mean that you're rejecting them on proper grounds. Would you like Sharia law, for example? Would you prefer a Muslim society where we enforce the Hadith? That would be against homosexuality, but it's not a good system.
In any war, there's propaganda, and propaganda is always on both sides. So it's war. There's weapon, and there are people, and people are not perfect. So are there instances or would I believe that there are instances when Ukraine bombs living quarters or hit something that they didn't intend to hit? Sure, I would believe it. I wouldn't even think twice about it. It's war. It happens, especially with the old Soviet weapon where accuracy was not an issue. Do I believe that they did this intentionally? No, I don't. But it's a commonly known fact that on both sides, popular places to locate soldiers and large masses of military personnel are schools, university campuses, etc., etc. So students are not there, pupils are not there, place gets bombed, and then the side which suffered the loss, it shoots the ruins, and it says that, okay, well, look, the opposing party just bombed a school, even though they had military personnel there in the school. So I do think that a lot of this is happening, and on both sides. But I think, and again, my sources of information are limited. I only have the open sources, news channels, etc. And from what I read on both Russian websites and Ukrainian websites, Western websites, it looks like the number of civil infrastructure objects, living quarters bombed by Russians is significantly higher than the ones bombed by Ukrainians on the occupied territories.
At some point in 2022, they bombed Sergeyevka, which is like a sea town where people come to have their vacation. And one actually a couple of civil buildings were attacked. And they used two brackets. And they said that also Ukrainian militaries were situated somewhere there, which is such a lie too. I know this place well because I was spending every summer there when I was a kid, and that's where my dad spent most of his life. Maybe not most, but like I don't know, 20 up to 20 years. So he knows people who actually live in those houses that were attacked. And of course, there was no militaries there. It doesn't make any sense to put militaries in those houses. It's not like you cannot do anything from there. What are you gonna do? Look at the sea, which is not the best position to look at the sea from, or use I don't know some cosmic equipment. Doesn't work too because there is no space. It's just living apartments where people live. So the Russians just hit this place. I don't know why they hit it, just to spread terror or to frighten Ukrainians. I don't know. But the fact is that one of the houses they hit was a hotel, and on that very day, I think it was a soccer team of kids had to be situated in that place. And when I was and I went the next day, I think after this happened, I went to that place because we had some job to do there as military. And the whole second floor of this hotel, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 story house, but the whole second floor was completely destroyed. And some people died. I don't remember how many people it was, maybe 10, maybe 20, but there were many people dead, many people wounded. And it was a blessing that this soccer team, for some reason, decided to go to another place on that day because they would all be wounded or dead at this day. Just doesn't make any sense. These two facts just clearly tell me not to trust Russian propaganda, not to trust what they say about this missile attacks, because they say, okay, there are militaries in there. That's not true. I know where our militaries are situated in my area. I cannot share all of this information, but I know for sure that they are not there, and they are not even I don't know, close to that place too. I saw reposts of Russian news about what's going on in my town here. It's called Belgorod-Vostrovsky, and in a little town not far from me that is called Sergeyevka. And just analyzing two of those news, you can see how Russian propaganda really works. So I saw a message in Russian news that in the stadium of our town, there was some military equipment, troops or something. That is such a lie. I live like a 10-minute walk from this place, and I was passing by it, and nothing was in there. Very obvious.
If we will follow statistic, we will find that like during this time from 2014, during like all this time of occupation, DNR, LNR, so-called countries, people who were killed from bombing and shelling, it was 28 or something like that. But I just want to share my own experience because part of my family of my wife is from Donetsk, from Donbas region. So actually from Makeyevka. It's pretty big city near Donetsk city. And my grandmother, so grandmother of my wife, living all this time in Makeyevka. And we have some Zoom calls with her like every week. And she shared with us her own experience. And she said that like this year was the most difficult for them as citizens of Makeyevka or Donetsk from the beginning of war. And she said that the most difficult thing for them was not shelling, not bombing, but they have a lot of Russian army in their city, and they have a lot of techniques military techniques, a lot of jets who's flying on the city, and also, yeah, they have some shellings, but actually, of course, they don't know who's shelling them. But we see a lot of confirmation and a lot of video we have in Ukrainian side, like from some resources, that as usual sound of I don't know how to say, of starting shelling and the end of the shelling just falling. The artillery is so close, so it's like it might be like 1 minute. So it's pretty strange. It looks like they're trying to create some cases for their journalists, for their propaganda, just to show and to say, look, 8 years of bombing, of shelling Donbass, we have to defend, we have to protect our Russian people who live there. But of course, situation is not so clear for people who live there, and people do not have clear position here there who live in, for example, in Donetsk and Luhansk. Of course, they have like new government or something like that, but they said that life level, or condition of life, not so good as it was before this conflict. So from my point of view, Russians trying to create some materials for their propaganda, and as usual, they do not count people's lives and really shelling, for example, Donetsk, Makeivka, just trying to create some video materials. I'm not sure that there is a reason for Ukrainian military forces to bomb just city center, for example, of Donetsk city or something like that. But I'm sure that Ukrainian military forces shelling and bombing Russian military forces.
We destroyed the part of the bridge with Crimea. They said we are terrorists. It was already like 6 months of the war. Some my friends died from their rockets, and they blaming that we are terrorists and trying to blame us in front of the whole European world that we are terrorists or something. Or no, like, yeah, it's just, I heard about this Fox News, about the Tucker. Yeah, it's really disappointed me. I'm really felt frustrated. I think the people just, okay, let's say, I don't think the Biden is a saint, and I don't think the Democrats never did the bad things. And I still don't think that their agenda is the best. And I still think, probably as you personally, what I think about you, what I know about you. But I think that the people use lie to just win. So, okay, there is a goal to make Biden and Democrats bad, and we will do everything what we can. We will use everything what we could to win the next election. And I don't think that truth is more important who will win on American elections. And if it's truth to say that, yeah, so I don't know the reason why it's going on. I want to hear more. That I heard that there is some Republicans who support Ukraine. I'm pretty sure that not all Republicans like this Tucker or this Fox News.
Very few Ukrainians would know. I think would know or would be interested in the internal politics of the U.S. Though, to a large extent, that I guess U.S. internal politics would affect the geopolitical agenda that U.S. would have. An average Ukrainian would care more about the help that the country is getting, regardless who is in power. Democrats, Republicans, Trump, Biden, doesn't matter. As long as help is coming, that's all they care for, in all honesty.
Americans and Ukrainians, many of us are becoming increasingly aware about how the media is being weaponized. From my experience, maybe I'm wrong, but most Ukrainians I know are unaware of how Western propaganda works, or even how it's working in their own country. They're aware of it in the past when they were aware of oligarchs running the media channels, or when they were aware of intense Russian propaganda, finding outlets through various channels. But in the current state, with some of the more liberal media channels, they're basically in step with the Western media, which has become leftist dominated. And it's not only been leftist dominated, it's become weaponized against the American people. And I don't have time to go into all the ins and outs of that, but I would recommend people to check out Jacob Siegel's work on a blog or website called Tablet Mag and his article, A Guide to Understanding the Hoax of the Century. He explains that after the 9/11 incident, with the expansive growth of the internet, that the FBI, the NSA, and other intelligence agencies were able to monitor people's personal information more and more. And they used to have certain sort of psychological media tactics, some might call it psyops, that they used against foreign countries to demonize them or to explain why we were going to war against them, things of this nature. And more recently, with COVID and other things, they've turned this around and used it against the American people. Matt Taibbi, who's an award-winning journalist, he is currently being investigated by the IRS because of his Twitter files writings. And Michael Schellenberger is another guy on Twitter I recommend you follow because he's doing a lot to basically fight censorship and fight for freedom of speech. This is a very important issue in our day, and we need to understand who controls these media outlets that are feeding us these narratives. As far as Russian propaganda goes, there's an excellent article by Rand Corporation that goes through and explains why it works so well. And I would say that there are two different kinds of propaganda, Russian propaganda. There's one for the Russian people. They play on Channel 1 3 hours a day, every day, and they just say outrageous and bizarre things. They call Ukrainians LGBT Nazis, cannibals, Satanists. They say that Zelensky is addicted to hard drugs. Now, you might not like Zelensky or whatever, but just these claims are outrageous. They blow things out of the proportion. But if you talk to Putin personally in an interview or whatnot, he's way more sly. And the propaganda that they have for Western people, it's much more subtle. It's much more appealing to Western sympathies. They understand, through the internet how Western conservatives and others think, and they appeal to these things. And so it can actually come to the point where conservative Americans confuse Russian narratives with their own. And then when people begin to question the war or question the leftist media or question these agendas, they can be thought to be Russian agents, because they're like, wait a second, you're not pro-Ukrainian. Oh, you question the war, you must be a Russian agent. But this is the same kind of thing that Putin gets people in Russia to do. Anybody who's in Russia, who's a dissenter, who has a different perspective or point of view, they're labeled as agents. People are doing that now to people like Tucker Carlson or Tulsi Gabbard. I'm not going to say they are or aren't. I just think it's a little bit extreme to assume that because they're anti-establishment, because they have a different opinion or voice than the mainstream media, that they're actually agents of Russia. There's an interesting Russian documentary called Zombie, and it has English subtitles. You can find it on YouTube. And they did a test where they put people in a room. There would be one person viewing a white ball and a black ball. And all the other people in the room were agents. They were hired to kind of play this game, and they would call the white ball black. And they would test people based on their various intelligence levels, how they would respond to such testing. Would they say the white ball is black? And almost all the time, they got the one individual who actually knew that the ball was white. They would say it's black because everyone else did. So propaganda can also work this way, where everyone's saying it, everyone's believing it, so I'm going to go along with it. This kind of is related to the logical fallacy of counting noses, where you think the more people believe it, the more true it must be. Of course, we should all know, hopefully, that this is not a way to gauge truth. You gauge truth based on the standards of logic, based on evidence, based on scripture, and a sound interpretation of scripture, not just based on, what the mainstream media is trumpeting or what the majority of people believe. Another thing that media can do is oversimplify situations, or they try to make things clickbaity, so they try to get things out fast without actually carefully checking the facts. One thing I hear people talk about a lot regarding Ukraine is about how the people on this side are Russian speakers, and Putin says, I need to protect the Russian speakers. and on this side of the country there are Ukrainian speakers. But this is a way oversimplified understanding of the situation in Ukraine. There are many Russian speakers who are pro-Ukrainian, many. I don't think there's many who speak Ukrainian, their first language, who are pro-Russian, and that largely has to do with a lot of the pro-Russian oligarchs come from the eastern part of the country. But there's a historian, Yaroslav Ritsak, and he explains that Ukraine is more like 28 different parts. There's lots of different things influencing mentality, different cultures, different histories, and it's not so simple to say, oh, there's Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers. It's much more complex and nuanced than that. So I just wanted people to understand this, that just because people are Russian speakers doesn't mean that they're pro-Russian. And more people in Eastern Russia who have been having their neighborhoods bombed, they're all the more patriotic for Ukraine these days. Okay, now I'm going to show you a short clip from Glenn Beck on the Biden and Burisma Holdings relationship, just a little introduction in case you're not familiar, and then we'll ask some Ukrainians and American missionaries to Ukraine how familiar they are with this situation.
And it all started in February of 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. Do you remember this time? It was 2014. President Obama was president, and he decided to make Joe Biden his point man for the Ukraine, which really meant that Biden would be on the phone with Ukrainian leaders 2 or 3 times a month, and then he flew to Ukraine and he visited 5 times. So he's talking to these guys all the time between 2014 and 2017. In fact, Foreign Policy magazine says no one in the U.S. government has wielded more influence over Ukraine than Vice President Joe Biden. Now, that's true. Now, just a month after this happens, this guy, remember him? He's the friend. He's the guy who is part of this investment house. 1 month later, there is a meeting with Joe Biden and this guy at the White House. Now, we don't know what the partner at Rosemont Seneca was doing at the White House and what they were meeting about, but I'm sure it was probably something just like cookies and had nothing to do with anything about the Ukraine. However, coincidentally, 5 days later, we had an event. 5 days later, Joe Biden arrives at the Ukraine to meet with all of the leaders. Now, this is a high-level meeting with Ukrainian officials, and he brought with him very specific plans. And these plans were going to guarantee and assist the Ukrainian natural gas industry with $1.8 billion. Now, this was something that would guarantee the stability of the Ukraine and help them with their energy. Part of the energy portion of the program reads, quote, U.S. technical experts will help Ukraine develop a public-private investment initiative to increase conventional gas production from existing fields to boost domestic energy supply. Well, you know what's weird is we had 5 days later the $1.8 billion. But what's really weird is we sent the experts in as well. Because do you remember Burisma, owned by this cat who's so bad he can't even come to America? Burisma, again, is the largest natural gas company. So they wanted a piece of the $1.8 billion, sure, but they needed some experts on how to figure out how to get that gas out of the ground. And so who is invited in? This guy, Hunter. No, I'm sorry, this is Devon. Devon is made a board member. Isn't that great? By the way, that happened the very next day after the $1.8 billion. Now, just 3 weeks later, somebody else, another expert from the United States arrives, to help them figure out how to pull gas out of the ground, Hunter Biden. Now, the combined experience on gas between these two is 0. But he was on the board, and he's still on the board. Burisma announced these appointments publicly. U.S. media reported on it, but it's no secret. Nobody really cared because it's the Obama White House and they can do no wrong. But there was a pattern here with Biden, and whether it's meetings with foreign leaders in Washington or traveling to foreign capitals, business opportunities and deals magically materialize for Hunter's companies. Isn't that weird? And just what kind of company was Hunter Biden and Devon Archer joining with this one? Well, Burisma, if I may say, was described by a journalist, James Stafford, who covers the energy industry. He said, quote, Burisma fails to pass the most basic due diligence check. Its registration documents are impossible to run down. It publishes no asset information or financial records, nor does it release any audited financial statements. The complete lack of transparency means that anyone interested, including potential investors, must rely solely on press releases about Burisma's future plans and intentions. In other words, it's exactly what you would think a very dangerous oligarch would set up. Now, Hunter Biden and Devon Archer joined Burisma, the board, coincidentally, right before the British government decided to freeze the assets of this guy, $23 million. He was the founder of Burisma. So they froze it. Now, 9 months later, the British government finally gave up and unfroze the accounts because they couldn't get the Iranian prosecutors to even cooperate. Gee, I wonder why. Now, after Hunter Biden joined the board, the company's owner, remember this guy? You know what's crazy? He was suddenly off the no entry to the U.S. ban. He could get visas all he wanted. He could come to the United States. Those all disappeared. He became, Captain America. He's fine. The visas disappeared, but there was something else that disappeared. Oh yeah, the $1.8 billion loan. Where did it go? Well, that's the sticky wicket here. As the United States paid it, but we had to put it in to a bank. And well, we had to put it into the biggest bank in the Ukraine. And so we did. It's owned by this guy.
So after Euromaidan, Biden came to Ukraine and he said that we weren't going to be able to help Ukraine so much because of the corruption here. And then he did what they accused Trump of doing, which was a quid pro quo, where he said, we're only going to give you this $1 billion+ if you fire the Inspector General, Victor Shokin. And at the same time, his son, Hunter Biden, was sitting on the board of Burisma Holdings. Are you familiar with this story at all, and what do you think about it?
No, I know nothing about it, so yeah.
No,
I really don't know anything about it.
Like very vaguely. I heard that he is involved in that, and they were involved in some legal actions. And also, I heard that there was a try to somehow start a criminal case against him in our country. And
To be honest, I don't know so much information about that. I have heard that it was some corrupt scenario. Yeah, it was like some corrupt scandal, but I'm not sure about all these details.
Not really. No, I mean, I know that Hunter has connections with China and Ukraine and was receiving a lot of money, but I don't know anything about the details of it.
the Hunter Biden thing, I really do not know much about that. I didn't follow that closely. In my understanding, that's something that's kind of small change compared to what we're talking about now with the war and the money that's coming into Ukraine. I think whatever happened there is not significant enough to affect questions of whether the U.S. is involved in Ukraine, supporting Ukraine against Russia and how much money is coming in and so on.
I heard something in the news about this scandal. Was it with Biden's son? I think. Yeah, it was Biden's son having some scheming, something here in Ukraine, but no details because that's for me. It was we had more things to deal with, but not in details.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I do think, though, that the story is far more complicated than what is on the surface. So because of the corruption in Ukraine. So unfortunately, this again, it's a personal opinion, but unfortunately, the situation with Burisma is being presented not holistically but selectively in order to deliver some political dividends to the party who is presenting the situation. So
for sure, there's a Burisma company, and there's a smart guy who started this company, Zlochevsky. His name is Zlochevsky. He invited the son of Vice President of the United States to protect his company and kind of make a good publicity in the eyes of the Ukrainian prosecutors and just any government agency and completely in the whole world. And probably it was former president of Poland, Kwasniewski, was involved in these things too. So for sure there is corruption, and for sure. So Biden did it, and he threatened to withdraw money. It was a kind of like a more than $1 billion if Ukrainian parliament didn't move this general prosecutor, because this general prosecutor he opened the case against this company because they made a lot of crimes and financial crimes. I mean, and they made many mistakes. And this Hunter Biden wasn't involved directly in doing this, but he was kind of like a face of this thing, just to in a way to protect. And he got his money for sure. He got this money for sure, and it was a big money for doing nothing, just being in the board of trustees of that company. And when government prosecutor he started to case against this company, Burisma, then for some reason Biden decided to close this case. And in a way to close this case, he forced Ukrainian parliament under the threat of withholding money from Ukrainian government, which they were needed badly, as usually, as always. So they moved this government prosecutor. They just forced him to resign, and that's it. It's probably only one case.
We'll hit the rewind back to 2014. I was in downtown Kiev at the time, bivocational missionary working at an English school in downtown Kiev. Great job. But I go to work one day and there's a security guard in our office. I'm like, well, that's atypical. I do my teaching and everything. And we have a lunch break. So I said, I'm going to go for a walk in downtown beautiful Kiev. And I get to walk around Kiev and there's all these security cops everywhere and all this crazy stuff, the special service and whatnot. I get up to the big monastery there, and who should be there but Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden. I was like, well, this is interesting. So I go back, I Google everything, and come to find out he had come to Ukraine, and it was on that day that he betrayed the Budapest Accords, by which in the Clinton era, America agreed, along with UK and Russia, that if Ukraine was to surrender her nukes, then the US, UK, and Russia would defend Ukraine should anything happen. Well, Russia attacked, so that takes them out of the deal. And Biden came to Ukraine to announce that he was not going to honor the Budapest Accords because Ukraine is too corrupt. 2 weeks later, the whole thing with Hunter Biden and the Ukrainian energy thing comes out. So whenever someone claims to be a conservative, but does not support Ukraine, and he appeals to the corruption, my first question is, why are you an extreme Bidenist? Biden betrayed Ukraine, and you want to do what Biden did, but even more further by even reducing the support that we're giving now. That's an extreme Biden move. Another thing I might point out is that the reason that Ukraine was corrupt was because it is a post-Soviet country. Well, the bottom line reason is because it's run by humans and we're all fallen, sinful creatures, okay? But Ukrainian corruption in particular has a heritage of Soviet corruption, of Russian intervention. So Ukraine is not unique because it is corrupt. All of the post-Soviet countries are corrupt. Russia especially, they're the ones pushing the corruption. Ukraine is unique because Ukraine stood up to fight corruption. They had the Maidan revolution to oust Yanukovych, who was a puppet of Putin. Don't even get me started on these leftists trying to say that Trump was a puppet of Putin. He wasn't. We've lived under a puppet of Putin, Yanukovych, right?
Well, and the Orange Revolution was a standing.
Yeah, Orange Revolution, right? We're having these color revolutions. So Ukraine is standing up against the corruption. If you want to fight corruption, you want to stand up for Ukraine, not Russia. So this whole Ukraine is corrupt, so we don't want to defend them thing, that is absolutely antithetical to the presuppositions that people saying that are working with.
So I wanted to ask Ukrainian and American missionaries if they're aware about the Biden corruption in Ukraine, because I think it is connected to the current war. Of course, it's a much smaller thing, not only considering the amount of money we're sending to Ukraine now, but just the war in general is a much bigger issue. And just because there was Biden corruption here, maybe that had something to do with the war or sending all the funds to Ukraine, maybe, but it's kind of hard to imagine that they would allow these hundreds of thousands of people to lose their homes or to die so they could protect Biden corruption here. I think it's a much more bigger picture than that. It has to do with the military industrial complex. It has to do with globalist agendas and the World Economic Forum and how they're going to do in Ukraine, and investors in Ukraine like the IMF and the big banks and so on and so forth. So it's a much more complicated picture. However, I think it is important to understand the closeness of the Democrats and the Biden family to what they've been doing in Ukraine. Glenn Beck has like 4 two-hour videos explaining this stuff in depth for those who care to go into it a little bit deeper. My friend Arkady mentioned in the video that whether it's true or not, people are just basically presenting these stories from political motivation. So yeah, there may be something to that, but ultimately we as Christians, we as outsiders to the powers that be, what we should care about is this true or not? And if it is true, how is it affecting the stories that I'm being told through the media? One thing people point out is they see you post something about Ukraine and they'll say, oh, corruption, oh, money laundering. But I just want to say, like, guys, be careful. There has been money laundering here. There has been corruption, which was born out of the post-Soviet era, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone is always as possibly corrupt as they could be all the time. Yes, there was a strong, I would say, systemic culture of corruption where you just paid money to get things done, and a lot of it depended on who you knew. And it's very, very hard to change those things. That's probably one of the reasons it's so hard for them to integrate with this European Association Agreement. There's just so many fine details they have to change or work through. But look, the Biden stuff happened before Zelensky came in office. Zelensky came in office when Trump was president. And I'm not saying Zelensky's innocent or that he's guilty. I'm saying I don't know. Yes, it's been proven that he had money in offshore accounts with a few of his friends, transferred some to his wife. They have property in London, probably have property somewhere else. But we're talking about millions of dollars, not billions of dollars like the oligarchs have been embezzling for, the last couple decades or the last few decades. But you have to understand, he said that under the Yanukovych regime, he was taxing small businesses like crazy. He was very high level corruption, about as bad as it gets. So for him to say, I had this money I made acting and I put it in offshore accounts to protect it from them, I think that makes sense. I mean, Ukraine has been a black market. That's just the way it is. If you don't want to give all your money to the corrupt government and you make a lot of money, you're probably going to want to know how to hide it somehow. So, and he had connections to Kolomoisky back then, and I'm sure it wasn't a problem for him to find help on how to hide this money. However, there was the guy, Seymour Hersh, who was saying that Zelensky was embezzling money through some oil deal or something where he had embezzled like $500 million. But then he says, I can't reveal my source. My source is secret. So then people say, aha, see, Zelensky's corrupt. He has one documentary where he shows where he's sleeping. He's sleeping in a very simple room, in a very simple bed. I don't know if this is just for him to show how different he is from Yanukovych or how different he is from Putin. He talks about his family, how much he loves them in several interviews. And I think he seems sincere to me. Yes, he's an actor, but I think he truly loves his family, as far as I can tell. And this is stark contrast to Putin. who treats his family like complete trash. So while I don't trust the people Zelensky's in a relationship with, I also remember that he was a comedian who came into politics, and I'm not sure if he's privy or even fully understands all these agendas of the World Economic Forum. And one reason I think that way is because the IMF and the European Union, they were trying to make trade deals with Ukraine that were actually kind of exploitative. They weren't really the best thing for Ukraine, but for some reason, Ukraine just accepts it. They want to go along with it. You know, they want to be away from Russia so bad that they will basically sell the soul of their country to these bankers. And the question is, do they really understand what they're doing? They're selling. Do they really love their country because they're just selling it out? Or are they just ignorant? And maybe that's the case. So all I'm saying is I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. You know, Zelensky did a speech at the World Economic Forum about opening up Ukraine to investors. And I think we need to understand that these are not just investors. These are people that are trying to create a sort of neo-feudalism in the world and control everything and build these little smart cities and reduce the population. I know it sounds like crazy conspiracy theory stuff, but all this information is out there in the open. I can link you to some reliable sources on this. So this is what concerns me about Ukraine, because in this state of war, in this state of chaos, they can easily work in these business legislations, and these bankers, these World Bank, IMF, Soros, these guys can just come in and gobble stuff up. So I'm really concerned about the future of Ukraine. They're fighting one Leviathan with Russia, and they have another Leviathan in their living room.
John, I'll ask you the international polling question. There have been many developments in the House investigations into the First Family's international business dealings recently. There's one committee trying to get an FBI file alleging that President Biden took bribes. There's another IRS whistleblower who's alleging there's a cover-up in the investigation. Amid all of this, there was a Harvard-Harris poll this month that found that 53% of the public, including a fourth of Democrats, believe, quote, Joe Biden was involved with his son in an illegal influence peddling scheme. There's, of course, evidence that the president interacted with his relatives, associates from China, Mexico, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine. So what do you say to the majority of Americans who believe that the president is himself corrupt?
Wow.
Can I take that question?
The president has spoken to this. The president has spoken to this, and there's nothing to these claims.
Gentlemen, every day when I'm home in Texas, I hear from Texans who are deeply dismayed about the growing politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. If you are not, every one of you should be deeply concerned about the damage being done to the integrity of the institutions in which you operate. My office hears regularly from FBI agents and from assistant U.S. attorneys who are likewise concerned about the politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI, and this is profoundly damaging to the rule of law in our nation. Last month, a whistleblower brought to light the existence in the FBI of a report, an FD 1023, in which the informant alleges that President Biden and his family members engaged in a $5 million bribery scheme during his time as vice president. Deputy Director Abate, is it true that the FBI has a report making those allegations?
I'm not going to comment on that, Senator.
And why is that?
I'm just not going to comment on information we received, investigations, or
Do you owe an
ongoing matters.
obligation to the American people to be candid about evidence of corruption by the President of the United States?
This is an area that I'm not going to get into with you, Senator.
Well, I understand you don't want to, and that's why people are mad at the FBI, because you're stonewalling and covering up serious allegations of evidence of corruption from the president. Yesterday, Senator Chuck Grassley stood on the Senate floor and alleged that there are 17 recordings of this informant from Burisma, Ukrainian natural gas company. 15 of them are recordings, voice recordings of him talking to Hunter Biden. 2 of them are voice recordings of him talking to Joe Biden. Deputy Director Abate, Does the FBI have 17 voice recordings laying out evidence of a bribery scheme?
Senator, I would add also that we've worked with the House Oversight Committee.
Yeah, this is the Senate. We're the other side of the
Capitol.
Capitol. This is the Senate. Do you have those 17 recordings?
I'm not going to comment on any investigative matters, Senator.
See, that's the problem. The FBI, and I've had this conversation with Chris Wray too, this is why you are damaging the institution. The American people have a right to know whether there is serious, credible evidence that the President of the United States took a $5 million bribe. And by the way, if it's false, Chairman Durbin just rolled his eyes. If Chairman Durbin were interested in the rule of law, we would have a hearing on these allegations. But of course, the Democrats don't want a hearing on these allegations. And to be clear, if the allegations are false, you know who could disprove them? Joe Biden. He could call for this to be released publicly. But the FBI is stonewalling.
Mr. Abadi, I want to come to you because Tennesseans are incredibly concerned about the politicization of the FBI. And they have watched the FBI target parents, people of faith, people with conservative values. And I am often asked, what group is going to be next? And how did we get to this point? Because they have watched the FBI, under your leadership, draw their guns on a pro-life advocate. That was stunning to them. That was done in front of his wife and children. They have labeled parents interested in education as domestic terrorists. And all parents should be interested and are interested in their children's education. They watched the raid on a former president and a political opponent on his home. And these have confirmed their worst fears, that there are indeed two tiers of justice, and that there is a political cabal within the FBI that sees it that way. Because when Hillary Clinton mishandled information and she wiped her email server with a tool called BleachBit and then beat the mobile devices with a hammer and destroyed those SIM cards, you all basically said there's nothing to see here. There is nothing to question. And when President Biden mishandled classified documents, there was no raid on his home or on his offices. But you see how President Trump has been handled with this. So it looks like the old playbook of distract and deflect. And the American people have a right to be concerned about this. Now, I want to talk about Senator Grassley's information from yesterday, because when the FBI produced the document that you referred to earlier relating to the Biden bribery allegations, and you gave that to House Oversight, you all redacted any reference to the fact that the foreign national who allegedly bribed Joe and Hunter Biden had those 17 audio voice recordings. So first of all, why did you redact that part of the information?
Senator, first, as I said before, your assertion, or anyone who makes the assertion that the FBI is politicized, I reject it wholeheartedly. It's wrong. And it is not true. The work we do,
Okay,
and the
Mr.
people I
Abadi,
see in
then
the
let me
FBI.
ask you this. You said in your response to Senator Cruz that you and the FBI do your job to the best of your ability. So why don't you tell me what your job is? Is it to defend and shield Joe Biden, or is your job to protect this country and the Constitution of the United States? Which is it?
The job of the FBI is to protect the country, keep people safe, and uphold the Constitution of our great country.
So
Period.
why
That's
are
what we
you
work to do every day. Objectively, there are not two standards of justice. There is only one. It's applied equally to each and every
by
person.
perception, there are two standards, very clear standards of justice in this country. We see it every single day. The American people see this every single day. They look at you and they see a politicized entity that is weaponizing an agency of the federal government against the American people.
about the biolabs, one thing I find interesting is when Ukrainians hear this narrative about the biolabs, they just laugh and they ha-ha and just reject it. And at first I thought this was not careful thinking, but once I understood that they know the Russian propaganda story is that Ukrainians were building mosquitoes and putting them in some kind of drone to take them to get the Russians, or putting diseases in pigeons, it started to sound a little bit silly. And some people just say, no, we don't have any biolabs. But that's the thing, is they just knee-jerk react because it sounds Russian, and they just dismiss it completely. Now, on the Western side, it was they have biolabs, and people want to know, what are they doing with these biolabs? Are they building bioweapons? There was a guy on Twitter, clandestine, who was, 100% sure they were building bioweapons. But upon further research, as you see in the videos, it seems like all or the grand majority of these biolabs were just for health reasons, for agriculture reasons, and things of that nature. So at the beginning of the war, there was a claim that Ukraine had all these biolabs and was building bioweapons to be used to attack the Russians. Any thoughts on this?
I don't know what to say to that. It's just funny. It's complete nonsense.
Sure, the tire place that they bombed in April of 2022, 5 kilometers down from my house, was a biolab. The tires were smelling so bad, so I'm sure it was a biolab.
So it's like, it's very interesting for us because we know where the first shelling coming, and we know the places which were bombed. And mostly, like, we know these places. A lot of us have been there at that places, and it's objects of civil infrastructure and some military objects. So we know these places.
Unfortunately, we don't have biolaboratories. Both of my parents have been working in the scientific field for many years, and they know exactly what I'm talking about. From the beginning of the war, the Russians constantly came up with some fakes, and they could not confirm any of it. So this one of the most absurd one.
Yes, I've heard about this narrative at the very beginning of this full-scale war. I have personally no information about are there some chemical plants or labs or not. I think not. But even yes, why should people think that these labs were to, I don't know, to spread some create some biological weapon against some other countries? I think it's also the narrative from Russia to tell this information to their own people and to say, yes, there are so many reasons why we should start this war. Nazis in Ukraine, biolabs, and they're all against Russia and so on. I can, as you assume that there were just normal labs to do some scientific research, but all.
Right. Okay. Let's say this. For example, there is 200 biolabs, and maybe he bombed all of them. But what I definitely know that during this, but it's a joke, definitely, he didn't bomb them, but he bombed a lot of infrastructure. So I have a lot of friends in Odessa. I have my mother in Kyiv. She was sitting without the light for hours and days. I have a lot of friends in Kyiv, and like it's hard to say that all Ukrainian electrical power stations connected to biolabs and bombing the biolabs, he should destroy the electrical infrastructure. So he killed many people and many districts and many infrastructure. And I don't know what he wanted to bomb, but he definitely destroyed already the half of Ukraine.
It's also other funny question, because I even don't understand what does it mean biolab. So it's like some biolaboratories for chemical or biological weapon, right? I saw some funny videos from also Russian propaganda when they claim that they destroy everything, just showing some buildings. And as I was evident of all this bombing in the beginning of war, they try to bombing military stuff and trying to bomb some military bases or something like that, but like it was empty already. Yeah, it's also I don't know even how to say. It's just they just trying to imagine something for people, create some story, some very creative propaganda, and then to show for their population and trying to show it on TV. I don't know even how to command this biological laboratory. My wife is a PhD student, and she just yesterday she visited some laboratory. She is researching horses and some disease of horses, and so she's checking blood of horses. So yeah, we have some scientific laboratories, but it's not biolaboratory with some weapons or viruses or something like that.
There's collaborative research going on all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, in disease prevention and everything else. I mean, we were funding the lab in Wuhan, China, where COVID came from. I mean, we've got money going to biological research facilities everywhere. That doesn't mean it's biowar.
So of course, I heard this theory, which I think it was first said by Nebenzia. But also, I don't believe that even if Ukraine, which I don't believe in, but even if it was biological weapons produced there, that's for sure cannot be the weapons which would work against Russians only. So, but that was the biggest theory of Russia, that it was the biological weapon which was exactly produced to kill Russians.
No one was blown up. We don't have any biolabs which works for the NATO. Of course, we have research centers as any developed country. But nothing which described by the Putin. So we kind of prepare this unique thing like mosquitoes. Have you heard this? In the United Nations, Russian ambassador in the United Nations said, so we had this biolaboratory who produce mosquitoes who will bite only Russians, and they just bring them to this disease.
The most ridiculous was that they're saying that we have some like fighting pigeons, if I remember correctly. Or mosquitoes or stuff like this, and you know, and the guy who said it, he was saying it to probably United Nations Assembly. Yes, you remember this? He probably said it in the United Nations Assembly, on the Council of Defense or how to call it. And he said that, and I thought, like, for what reason he's doing it? Who would buy this stuff about like some infected pigeons and mosquitoes, and like how you can control them? It's also. It's very hard to answer some fairy tales. And also, you know what, because Russian propaganda mostly works like the opposite direction. They are doing something and then they blame it on us. For example, they were bombing civil objects of infrastructure, just some home of people, a lot of homes, you know, and then they always blame Ukraine that we are doing it. And so when they say this stuff about Biolabs, I start to suspect that they have some biolabs and try to produce some chemical weapon. I mean, like, I'm almost sure that they tried to do it.
Oh yeah. Biolabs that target, what was it, Slavic chromosomes or Slavonic DNA. Those biolabs. That's the thing. I think we had a couple of biolabs on the basis of institutes that were functioning to help us with like pandemics and viruses, and you know that we have tuberculosis pandemics in Ukraine since 90s, and other things like pox, was it chicken pox or something? And I from what I heard, they were developing some medicine for that, but to use it as weapon, never. I think he bombed the wrong guys and wrong places. In any way, they didn't have any proof and didn't provide anything apart from their words. You know, they how would they provide any proof if they bombed all the biolabs? I mean,
just knowing the Ukrainian army and knowing that biolabs is just such an advanced technology, it's not just easy. I cannot become friends with somebody and start a biolab. And we have so many gaps in military knowledge in Ukraine that we need to start working at the most simple things, like improving guns, you know, leave alone the biolabs, because it's advanced technology and scientifically Ukraine is not developed well. We would not be doing that. And of course, yes, I never saw anything like a picture of destroyed biolab. Even Russians, I think they cannot even make fake pictures about it.
We have specific information about those institutions in Ukraine, scientific institutes that have the technology to build this very dirty bomb.
соорудить вот эту самую грязную бомбу.
Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, makes an official statement that the occupying forces have found drones in Ukraine that can spread mosquitoes.
According to the description, such a drone transports a container with a large number of infection-carrying mosquitoes to a given area and releases them. When biting, mosquitoes infect attacked people with pathogens of especially dangerous diseases.
Особый интерес вызвала детальная информация о реализации США на территории Украины проекта по изучению переноса патогенов, мигрирующими между Украиной и Россией, другими соседними странами, дикими птицами. Согласно документам, американская сторона планировала вести на Украине в 2022 году работы по патогенам птиц, летучих мышей и рептилий с дальнейшим переходом к изучению возможности переноса ими африканской чумы свиней и сибирской язвы.
I'm in Washington, D.C. because I want to understand the origins of a conspiracy theory that has become the justification for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But long before it was the official line of the Kremlin, it started with a single tweet from an American, a QAnon follower who goes by War Clandestine, basically saying that the reason Russia went into Ukraine was to destroy US-funded biological laboratories. Laboratories that he says are developing bioweapons that are going to be used against Russian citizens. And this Twitter thread got shared thousands of times. It ultimately ended up on InfoWars, and it went as far as Fox News, the Congress, and of course, to the Russian government itself. Former President Dmitry Medvedev does an interview where he says he's extremely concerned about these bioweapons labs. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov does a press conference where he says part of the invasion is about securing or destroying these labs.
I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
And this is where you say no, and we can carry on with our presumed narrative.
Ukraine has biological research facilities.
Oh, no, that's not good.
Which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of.
What? No! Abort!
So we are working with the Ukrainians.
Pretty sure it's not Ukrainians.
The Ukrainians.
If you are an Undersecretary for State Affairs, do learn the name of Ukrainians.
On how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
Да, это анекдот. Нечего объяснить. Нет у нас. Мы с удовольствием.
The Russian accusations are absurd. They're laughable. And, in the words of my Irish Catholic grandfather, a bunch of malarkey. There's nothing to it. It's classic Russian propaganda. And I wouldn't, if I were you, I wouldn't give it a drop of ink worth paying attention to.
Yeah, but can you explain to us has there been any relationship between the?
We are not developing biological or chemical weapons inside Ukraine. It's not happening.
They have a large biological and chemical weapons program. So it's a pattern, but they also have the capacity. While I'm not going to get into specific intelligence, we look at all of those factors. And we also know, and one of the main issue that prompted my Twitter thread yesterday was that Russia has a history also of inventing outright lies like this, which is the suggestion that the United States has a chemical and biological weapons program, or Ukraine does, that they're operating. Russia is the country that has a chemical and biological weapons program.
Yeah, our program dates back a little over 30 years now, watching the fall of the Soviet Union with some alarm, and we're concerned about what was going to happen to the Soviet WMD arsenal.
So when it comes to the biological weapons, I mean, Did you get rid of them?
Oh, well, I mean, we got rid of what we could cooperatively get rid of. I mean, the U.S. still assesses that Russia has an active biological weapons program, so I'd say we didn't get it all.
When it comes to Georgia, Ukraine, Poland, Kazakhstan, are the remnants of that biological weapons program, is it gone?
There's no evidence that the U.S. is aware of that any of those countries have a biological weapons program.
No weaponization of anything was being done. It was just a program to sort of help clean up the biosecurity and biosafety system in Ukraine.
Putin has put forward the idea that Ukraine is developing bioweapons in conjunction with the U.S. For quite some time. Do you have a sense of what the sort of utility of this bit of disinformation was?
We were traveling back from Lviv. Someone sends me the tweet from Maria Zakharova. I guess she's the press person for the Ministry of
Foreign Ministry, yeah.
It's a picture of Ulana with a weird linkage thing to me, to her father, and to this historical figure that Ulana hails from a family of Nazis because Ivan Yurkil is in a SS uniform. That this is her grandfather.
But it's not true.
Not
That's
true.
not my grandfather.
It's not her grandfather. And I'm thinking, oh my God, these guys are going to find us and I'm going to be hung on the streets as a Nazi.
For me, what was striking was how they put the story together. It's how disinformation works, right? Tiny grains of truth, and then they mash them together and put a conclusion that's absolutely not true. So yes, I was the Minister of Health, and yes, I was in a program. We were trying to get biosafety and biosecurity laboratory a laboratory policy in place, right? So that's true. And then they hook up this fake Nazi that is supposedly my grandfather. So in the end, it's this American came to Ukraine to build biolaboratories with Nazis to kill Ukrainians. And that's why we have to come in and save the Ukrainians from her and these biolabs.
The U.S. government should not be funding something that is killing people in a country that's not even our own. I have introduced a bill to stop taxpayer funding for bioweapons.
Why do you think people believe this? Why do you think they believe that these labs could be something nefarious and dangerous and targeted specifically at them?
I think that in those that believe, some of it is because they don't have access to other information. I think it activates fear response in some folks. It activates people that already distrust governments, that distrust authority, and are looking for an easy answer that sounds like something nefarious is happening. These aren't U.S. laboratories. They're Ukraine's public health and animal health laboratories. It's all transparently published disease surveillance research, and they're going to learn nothing from the laboratory that they don't already know, but they might endanger the community based on their violent actions.
Does Ukraine have biological weapons? The answer was a very carefully phrased, Ukraine has biological research facilities, after which Senator Rubio himself gave her the exit clause by putting the blame on Russia potentially doing a false flag operation in the future. Ms. Parthmore, clearly the American government is not being able to deny the fact that Ukraine has biological research facilities which can possibly be used in biological warfare as well. That's quite clear. I'd like your response, please.
Yeah, let me be absolutely clear. In very direct language, we do not believe that the Ukrainians have biological weapons programs. They have been a champion for non-proliferation since they became an independent nation. I absolutely do not believe that there are any biological weapons activities that have been conducted at any of these laboratories as assisted by the United States or by the Ukrainians.
Can you tell us more about what these biolabs are?
Absolutely. So one of the original impetuses for setting up these laboratories in the former Soviet Union was because of the Soviet biological weapons program. They had huge industrial scale biological weapons facilities in places like Kazakhstan. And we've been concerned over the years, including because they established and expanded these programs after signing the biological weapons program. We've been very concerned that Russia may still have a biological weapons program, but that's not the primary purpose. They conduct public health research, similar to labs all around the world that do public health research.
Now, that's very generic. Can you be more specific than that? Can you be more specific than that? What do they study?
absolutely. They study influenzas and other pathogens that have the risk of affecting humans and animals and livestock and agriculture. They essentially serve as an early warning system
and does
for
this
detecting
study
disease outbreaks.
Does this study involve developing pathogens as well?
No. There's work that's occurring for defensive purposes as well as public health purposes. The U.S. Department of Defense has more than 100
No, but they're being used for military purposes. See, that is very different. Ms. Parthmore, I think you need to explain this, because you just tried to tell me some time back, in fact about a minute back, that this was for public health, whereas I have come to you and I have just confronted you and said that there has been increased funding for the Nimble Elder program of the Defense Threat Research Agency, which is driven by quote-unquote classified Department of Defense guidance, and this is aimed with low visibility, which means the world should not know, chemical and biological research for military purposes. But you just said public health. This doesn't sound like public health to me at all. What are you doing in Ukraine? Ms. Parthmore, would you care to clarify, please? Because you have used biological weapons and chemical weapons in the past. We're getting very concerned, please. Can you tell us what exactly is going on in the biolabs in Ukraine?
The United States ceased to have biological and chemical weapons programs after signing on to the Biological Weapons Convention and the Chemical Weapons Convention. This work is defensive and for public health purposes. As I've tried to explain,
no, but for military use? But for military use? But for military use?
No offense.
But is it for military use?
Offensive military. There is no offense. The military includes humans
that
can be
you're
infected
telling me
by
it's not
infectious
offensive, but yes, for military use.
They accuse us, again us, that we are allegedly developing biological weapons. Allegedly, we are preparing a chemical attack. This makes me really worried, because we've been repeatedly convinced. If you want to know Russia's plans, look at what Russia accuses others of. Look, spreading such accusations in the Russian media shows that it is they who are capable of this. The Russian military, the Russian special services, it shows that they want it. They have already done such things in other countries, similar. They themselves announced, they themselves complained, they themselves organized, and they will do so again and again, if they are not stopped.
This is a government that has used banned chemical weapons on its own people in the past. They've done so on Russian territory. They've done so on British soil. They have supported the brutal Assad regime, which itself has used banned chemical weapons on its people.
And I'll make you one other prediction, by the way, which is that the stuff that you're hearing about chemical weapons, this is straight out of their playbook. They start saying that there are chemical weapons that have been stored by their opponents or by the Americans, and so when they themselves deploy chemical weapons, as I fear they may, they have a sort of a Maskirovka, a fake story ready to go. And you've seen it in Syria. You saw it even in the UK.
There are 25 to 30 U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine. According to the U.S. government, these biolabs are conducting research on dangerous pathogens. Ukraine is in an active war zone with widespread bombing, artillery, and shelling, and these facilities, even in the best of circumstances, could easily be compromised and release these deadly pathogens. Instead of trying to cover this up, the Biden-Harris administration needs to work with Russia, Ukraine, NATO, the UN to immediately implement a ceasefire for all military action in the vicinity of these labs until they're secured and these pathogens are destroyed.
Well, Republican Senator Mitt Romney issued a scathing response, tweeting, quote, "Tulsi Gabbard is parroting false Russian propaganda. Her treasonous lies may well cost lives." Hillary Clinton is at you. Others have come out against Gabbard for what they've said is furthering a Kremlin-backed conspiracy. Not the first time she's been accused of this.
I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians.
So what exactly did Tulsi Gabbard do? Did she call for a violent overthrow of the United States government? Did she come out and pledge allegiance to Putin? Did she get a Cyrillic tattoo on her neck? No, she didn't. What she said is, we have a problem. Here's how we know. She cited publicly available information and said we should probably deal with that problem. But in case, here you have Mitt Romney, who was a consultant, for God's sakes, accusing someone who's been in the Army for nearly 2 decades of treason. People didn't used to talk that way. Treason is a death penalty offense. Yeah, she hates our country because she's worried that a pathogen might escape from a biolab and hurt people. There's no recent precedent for that, so she's clearly listening to Alex Jones too much, and she's treasonous. Actually, everything that Tulsi Gabbard said, as you know, is true. It's not a Republican issue, it's not a Democrat issue, it's a factual issue. And even in war, truth is a defense. In fact, it's the only defense. Is it true? And in a free country, you can speak the truth. That right can never be taken away, or else it's not a free country. But by the way, since we're speaking of facts, the director of the U.S. Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, a man who would know, a man called Robert Pope, has confirmed that scientists are keeping Soviet-era pathogens for research purposes in Ukraine. They told us they were destroying them. They should have destroyed them, but they haven't. What could go wrong in an active war zone? And they knew that those pathogens existed and were being experimented upon, researched, and they didn't secure them before the Russians invaded, though they knew the Russian invasion was coming because they told us. And then Tory Newland, the Undersecretary of State who oversees this disaster, testified under oath that yes, Russian forces might seize those biolabs in Ukraine, and we should all be very worried about that possibility. Over the weekend, CBS News reported that Pentagon officials have confirmed that these biolabs in Ukraine are in fact conducting research on anthrax and other, quote, deadly pathogens.
Pentagon official I talked to this morning said there is no movement of chemical weapons into Ukraine. At least they're not seeing the signs of it. The concern is that the Russians will seize one of these biomedical research facilities that Ukraine has, where they do research on deadly pathogens like botulism and anthrax, seize one of those facilities, weaponize the pathogen, and then blame it on Ukraine and the U.S. because the U.S. has been providing support for some of the research being done in those facilities.
Everybody in leadership has completely lost the ability to think beyond the next tweet. Who is thinking about tomorrow or next month or 20 years from now? Not one person. And anyone who tries is an agent of Putin.
Now to a story of Russian disinformation that has been quickly embraced and amplified by some in America's right-wing media. When State Department Undersecretary Victoria Nuland confirmed this week that there was bio-research going on in Ukraine, critics say that Tucker Carlson of Fox News took those remarks out of context.
Now you see the Chinese government kind of openly repeating Russian propaganda, for example, about the use of supposed American biolabs in Ukraine.
This Russian misinformation about biolabs in Ukraine, people on the Trump right who are actually parroting Russian propaganda every day and every night.
The supposed biolabs. Well, the U.S. government says they have biolabs and told us under oath that they're worried about the contents of these biolabs, which they failed to secure, might get into the wrong hands. But it's right-wing Putinite propaganda. Now, we're going to do something we almost never do. We're going to play you a clip from The View, which is now calling for a Department of Justice investigation into this show and Tulsi Gabbard. Watch.
What Tucker Carlson parrots every night on Fox News, what Tulsi Gabbard is spreading, is actually helping Putin get away with criminal acts against innocent Ukrainian civilians.
And I think DOJ, in the same way that it is setting up a task force to investigate oligarchs, should look into people who are Russian propagandists and shilling for Putin. That's being, if you are a foreign asset to a dictator, it should be investigated. In fact, I remember when Tulsi Gabbard, and I even hate that we're discussing it because I think to myself, who is this woman? How do you not call out something that is repeating false Russian propaganda and that has been brought down?
They used to arrest people for doing stuff like this.
They, us, are Russian assets, and there is a war. There's a case for detaining them militarily. Trials are a sign of good faith and patience on the part of democracy. So we're at war with Russia. We must send you to the gulag because freedom. Because a democracy, the one thing democracy doesn't have patience for, is dissenting views from its own citizens, particularly citizens who sincerely hope and pray for the best for their own country. Those people must be imprisoned militarily.
Joining us now is Andy Weber. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Strategic Risk and a former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, so you have been to these places. Please tell us what exactly is going on in these labs in Ukraine.
Well, they function just like your county public health laboratory. They monitor for infectious disease outbreaks. They're sort of a smaller version of the Centers for Disease Control. And indeed, the United States government has been supporting these laboratories since 2005 in order that they have a better system of detecting and responding to infectious disease outbreaks.
Now, is there anything at all sort of nefarious or secretive about these facilities?
Nothing at all. They're totally open, transparent laboratories. I've visited them many, many, many times, as have international visitors and the World Health Organization routinely.
So why do you think Victoria Nuland said that she's concerned about the Russians' approach on them?
Well, for the same reason we're concerned that Russia is attacking civilians, nuclear power plants. These laboratories have culture collections from the endemic viruses and bacteria that are circulating in these areas. So because of fear of a Russian military attack, the prudent thing for them to do would be to destroy those culture collections so they're not released into the environment or used somehow nefariously by the Russian attackers.
One of the arguments that Carlson has been making is that in 2005, as you point out, this is when this started, that some claimed that the reason that these labs existed was to deal with sort of old Soviet-related biological or chemical issues. And his question was, well, why would it take 17 years? What have they been doing for these 17 years in that lab?
Well, they're doing what the Centers for Disease Control does every day. They're responding to the COVID outbreak. They're doing diagnostic testing. They're doing things that serve the public health and global health, frankly. We want these disease outbreaks to be contained before they spread to the United States. Most of them belong to the Ministry of Health. A couple of them that are veterinary laboratories belong to the Ministry of Agriculture. But these are totally open and transparent facilities, yes.
And why would, the other question a lot of people ask is, why would the U.S. help fund these kind of labs?
Well, as I explained, it's part of a global early warning system for infectious disease outbreaks. You know, just as we fight terrorism abroad because we don't want attacks to occur in the United States, we want to stop infectious disease outbreaks at the source, wherever they may occur. So we've been strengthening the capacity of now over 30 countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, Kazakhstan, Georgia, and Ukraine to improve their ability to detect and respond to infectious disease outbreaks so we can prevent pandemics. After 9/11, the president of Ukraine invited a U.S. team that I led into Ukraine to visit all of the biological and chemical facilities because they were concerned that terrorists might exploit these labs or divert materials from these laboratories. So I spent 2 weeks combing through all of these laboratories and then helped create a program of assistance to improve their safety and their function for disease control.
Now, there's different kinds of levels of lab safety, but the highest is BSL-4. That's the whole Grace, Rex, and Contagion, no available cure kind of safety measures, which is where you'd build a weapon. This is a map of every single BSL-4 lab in the entire world, compiled by Gregory Koblenz, who's probably the foremost expert in the world. There are 47 BSL-4 labs in the entire world, which means if we take the high end, then it means there's as many BSL-4 labs in Ukraine as there are in the entire world. This is Fort Detrick, Maryland. It's where the U.S. does biodefense. This is the Sally Port where vehicles are inspected. And here's the emergency generators. This is DSTL Porton Down in England. Sally Port, generators. Find me 46 sites in Ukraine that look like that.
I guess one thing that concerns people is about the U.S. gain of function research in China. So we just had the big COVID thing. And now people are saying that, oh, notice how the COVID strains, they stopped mutating. And since the war, all these biolabs must have been destroyed, and now we don't have these new COVID mutations. Well, first of all, show me one picture, one piece of evidence that one of these biolabs was occupied or destroyed. Why are they bombing malls and apartment buildings? Do you really expect me to believe on the first day they hit all these biolabs and now it's done? So this is just connecting dots that shouldn't be connected. If you had proof, but this is all just fantasy stuff. There's nothing. The U.S. has funded biological research all over the world. I will not claim that the United States has been completely innocent in all of its research, but to automatically come to the worst possible conclusion, I just think we should slow down and actually learn what hard evidence looks like before we make such accusations in such a serious situation with so many just normal everyday people dying.
There are members of Congress who are controlled by the intel agencies. I'm not speculating on this. I lived there for 35 years. I know this. I had a very high-ranking member of the House Intel Committee tell me at dinner at a restaurant in Washington when he'd been drinking, we got to talk about this. And I said, oh, I'll text you. He goes, I can't text. And I said, why is that? And he goes, well, because NSA reads my text. And I said, NSA reads it? Wait, you're the head guy on the Intelligence Committee. You're their boss. You're providing oversight in our constitutional system. He's like, yeah, but, they're still spying at me. First thing. Second thing, Michael McCall, who is, the leader of, I would say, the neocons in the House, kind of low-key neocons, but neocons. I got into an argument with him once last year on the phone. He told somebody that I was a Russian agent or something, and I was outraged. So I called him on the phone, and I used bad language. I was really mad. And he said, whoa. I just got that, that's what the intel briefers told me, that you were working for Russia. And I said, that's what the intel briefers told you? You believe your intel brief? Like, how old are you, son? I'm from DC. My dad was in this world. Like, you're being manipulated by your intel briefers. Right. Duh. And he's like, well, they had, all kinds of corroborating evidence. Did you see the evidence that I was a Russian agent? I'm an American. I was born here. I've never lived anywhere else. Pretty patriotic. Like, what an outrageous thing to say. He goes, well, they had, I believe what they, basically, he tells me I believe what they say.